she went to the dentist. What you cooking up? Just I was gonna get her like try to get her from like right here.
No, I mean, we can try to put them in the house. You got it. All right, y'all. I am really tickled. You guys have been hearing me talk about this since the first day I got here, that we have an important person who's going to be with us today. And here she is, Davis. She's visiting Mississippi from Washington, D.C., where she and her family live. She spends a little bit of time every year in Florida, where I live. But she and I have never connected until we actually met in Mississippi just Saturday. She's down here because the 60-year anniversary of Freedom Summer just happened. And it was celebrated this past weekend over in Indianola. And there was a nice big event, and they went out to the same kind of sites we went out to. And so that's where I first met Miss Linda, was this weekend. I think what we'll do is, I know you guys got questions, and I know the staff has questions, and I have questions, because I'm just meeting Linda this weekend. One of her most treasured memories of being in Mississippi is working with Mrs. Hamer. You guys are learning about Mrs. Hamer, who she was, what she did, what she was about, and I'm just going to ask Linda to talk in whatever way you want to about meeting Mrs. Hamer and then what she meant to you.
Well, I met Mrs. Hanger. It was the second week of the training in Oxford, Ohio. Are you familiar with the training program for the workers who are going to come into Mississippi? There was a first week where those involved in voter registration were being trained, and a second week where those of us involved in community center development and freedom schools were being trained. The first group arrived, and that was the group in which Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner were all involved. And then they left on Friday or Saturday to go into Mississippi. And we arrived on a Sunday night for the second week of the training. And at first, that Sunday was a very happy, exciting, sort of, first day of school thing. You're seeing and meeting people, and it was lovely. And we went to sleep, and then the next morning we woke up, and it was like you could feel that something awful had happened. You could just feel it. Everybody, and especially all of the SNCC volunteers who come up to train us, they were like shell-shocked, because they knew what had happened. And so it took us a while for the communication to occur. About the three guys had not been able to phone in. Everybody was very worried. Call the Justice Department, call your parents, do whatever you can to bring attention to what's happening. And my head was reeling. I was scared. I was scared when I arrived, but now I was even more scared. But it was either that day or the next day. I remember so well meeting Mrs. Hamer. And she sat under a big tree, and a bunch of us were at her feet. And she talked about her story, about how she lost her livelihood on the plantation when she tried to register to vote, how there had been shootings into the houses in Ruleville where she moved after she was forced to leave, her beating in Winona, and yet her decision that she was going to be carrying on this work. And I've never seen or heard such courage. It was like, it was an incredible experience. And I decided I just wanted to spend as much time as possible as I could in the presence of Mrs. Hamer and learn as much as I possibly could about how she developed that courage and how she lived with that. And so I was lucky enough to be able to, we could select where we wanted to go. So I chose Ruleville and was fortunate enough to be assigned there. She, of course, was not around that much. She was so busy that summer campaigning for the Freedom Party's participation in Atlantic City and what was going to be going on there. But I also met, just from my being in Ruleville, I met other people, a whole community of folks who had just decided finally, I mean, the effort to get the vote and what it took to go down. Today, you probably know, I mean, it's fairly easy to register to vote. Although, does anyone, none of you are yet old enough to vote, you probably don't know about the process. But in those days, to register to vote in Sunflower County, do these kids know about that, or should I?
You go ahead and talk about the details.
Okay.
I think we're learning about it.
All right. The process was, you had to go down, and it was about a 24-question application. Some of it was sort of what you'd expect, your name, your address, how long you've lived here, family, how many kids. But the last 3 questions were, you had to write out a section of the Mississippi Constitution. Then you had to write out in your own words what that section meant. And then the final question was, what is it to be a good citizen? And guess who decided if you were right or wrong in your answers to those questions? The white registrar. And people went down, they did that, they filled out all those questions, but the decision about whether they had passed or failed didn't happen that very day. They had to come back in 3 weeks to get the report from the registrar whether they had passed or failed. And I had known women who had gone down to Indianola to try to register to vote maybe 23 or 24 times over a 2-year period, only to be told no, 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 time and again. And the miracle of what the Justice Department was doing at that time in challenging voting practices finally came to fruition in Sunflower County a little bit earlier even than the passage of the Voting Rights Act in the summer of '65, when finally the court said, no, you got to stop this process. It's not fair. It's not right. They changed it to a 6-question form, you know, just name, address, how long you lived, maybe age, probably age, because that was a legal requirement. And I remember some of the women, I stayed down in Ruleville for another year at the end of the summer. So I was there in the spring of 1965 when this new short application was being used, they were forced to use it. and to see the look on people's faces when they return to say, I'm registered. And only the word that was used is, I'm registered. I'm registered. And it was just that kind of determination. Can you imagine over a 2-year period being told 23, 24, 25 times, no, you're not gonna be able to go. You don't pass this test. And then that determination, so it was both Mrs. Hamer and then the many other people in the community of Rollville. And what kind of a miracle was that? That against so many odds, they continued, they persisted. And that is, it's like a wellspring from which I drink and find support in every difficult moment of my life.
Thank you. What questions do y'all have? And they can be pretty much any question. What you got?
Do you feel like that Miss Hamer got the recognition she deserved?
Oh, she couldn't get as much recognition as she deserves, in my judgment. She, especially after her testimony before the Democratic Convention, her name was nationally known. But, she had a rough life. Even as she returned to Rollville, she tried to do some incredible things. She started a pig farm, a pig cooperative, where, to try to help people have enough food to eat. But it wasn't a success, I think she had some real struggles after, in the later years of her life, in the later 60s and early 70s. But I live in Washington, D.C., so there is a museum there, the National Museum of American History. And I just loved seeing at one point a maybe 30-foot-high picture of her on the outside of the building as I walked by. And it was only about 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, and I just loved that she was, getting that kind of recognition. But I don't know, I think in some years, I wish her story were taught in every school everywhere, and, probably that's not happening.
Did y'all learn about her at West Town? Yes, no, yes, no?
Had you never heard about Mrs. Hamer before?
Heard
Heard. Oh.
I think on our station they announced her the anniversary of her death, I think.
Well, for a while, I know a short while, she lived in Tallahatchie County. When she was kicked off the plantation, she lived for a while in Rollville, and then she lived for a while in Tallahatchie. And I think Mac went there to pick her up to take her to some training programs and all of that. So she has of course, she lived right next door, so in Sunflower County.
So do y'all know, so I think it'd be really interesting. So one of the innovations of Freedom Summer was when white kids like Linda came down, they didn't stay in a hotel. There weren't any hotels. So you want to describe how that all worked?
Oh. We stayed with families who were in the movement. And that took courage to open their homes to these white kids, primarily white kids who were coming down from the South. And we were just assigned. I met Mrs. Thomas in front of Mrs. Hamer's house. When we got off the bus, we were taken to Mrs. Hamer's front yard, and we met our families. And I have a picture of me and my new host mother. She's sort of sitting across from me, like Davis and I are sitting now, and getting to know each other. And I lived with them all during the summer. And then when I decided to stay on, I moved to another house, Ruby Davis. But there were, I mean, those folks, and one of the things that, I don't know if you were there for this, at the reunion, but they are trying to make a list of all of the families who housed the workers. Because that took amazing courage. I mean, people, you know, in Ruleville, I mean, you know, people shot into houses. It just happened. Or there would be economic reprisals against you if you opened your home to us. But you know, Ruleville, pretty early on, and I think it was with Mrs. Hender's leadership, you know, it was a pretty active group of folks who were working a lot with Mac, who was a wonderful.
Let me stop you right there. Mac, Charles McClellan.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. You know him as Mac. He lives in Indianola now. We're working on a big project with Mr. Mac, and we hope to have him here later this week. Yeah, Pablo, what you got?
So as high school students, I don't know that they got a whole bunch about Freedom Summer. So can you tell us a little bit about what was the rhetorical reason why it was a good idea for whites to join Freedom Summer and join this struggle down here, and what was that supposed to do to the rest of the world? And some of the dangers, obviously, I don't even think they know who
I'm sorry, you don't even.
I don't think that they know who Cheney and Goodman were. But the whole kind of rhetorical reason why you joined, what was the idea, how that was supposed to kind of look for the rest of the country?
I mean, now I obviously wasn't involved in that decision, but as I read both writings by Mr. Houck here and others, it was Bob Moses was the director in Mississippi for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and it was. They had been organizing for about 2 years, SNCC had, and they were getting hurt badly. And they were not having the kind of success they wanted in terms of getting people registered. And how could they with that sort of an application process required, you know? People weren't registering to vote. So they formed a parallel party to challenge the regular Democratic Party and to show that black people in the state of Mississippi did want to vote, and they had a whole separate registration process for that. And but to spread out, to have the kind of resources that they needed to reach a whole lot of people, they needed to bring in a lot of other folks from outside. The SNCC group was very small. I don't know, probably 20 maximum in the state. So they just needed people, number one. But there was the very sad truth, that, I mean, in the course of the 2 years SNCC was in Mississippi, many people had been killed. And no attention, or insufficient attention, was paid because they were African American. And I think it was a very calculated decision that if national attention was going to emerge and be focused on the problems in Mississippi, they would pay more attention if white kids were involved. And if the white kids got hurt, there would be much more of a response. That's a horrible truth. And Bob Moses, that as I understand it, was what Bob Moses believed to be the case. And I think that was the targeting. I mean, they recruited at primarily white schools, not the historically black schools, you know, colleges and universities, but at the sort of northern elite schools. And I think they were trying, frankly, to get in young people who had connections in government, and so that if they went missing or were killed, there would be a real response. And weren't they right about that? Because when James Cheney, young black man who from all accounts, was incredibly talented and able. And then Andrew Goodman, a white student from a Boston school, and Mickey Schwerner, white. He had been down and was working in Neshoba County for a while. And when they went missing, you know, national attention became focused on Mississippi. So yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, so notice what Bob Moses did. I mean, Bob Moses is a straight up genius anyway,
Yeah.
PhD from Harvard, mathematics. He decides he's gonna use the country's racism against itself. If y'all don't care about black people in Mississippi, fine, we get that. You'll care about white people in Mississippi because when they go missing, or they get hurt, or they get thrown in jail, white people suddenly care about Mississippi. Isn't that interesting? So Linda and her people, and 450 or 500 white kids came, they were being used. Let's be real frank about this. I mean, God bless Linda for what she did, but she was being used. She knew she was being used. She was being used to bring the nation's attention to Mississippi. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong.
And so a lot of kids in SNCC said, and they were kids, they were just a little bit older than y'all. They said, Linda, go home, stay home. We don't need you. We don't need your whiteness here in the state of Mississippi. We black people can take care of ourselves. And Bob Moses and Mrs. Hamer said, no, bring them. There's a big fight in SNCC. It's like a 6-month fight to bring the white kids. That was a big fight that didn't get resolved in one weekend.
Well, I don't know if that ever got resolved. Yeah, I mean, we came, yeah, but I mean, I think it ultimately was the issue that, you know, led to the demise.
So imagine you're working for SNCC and you're a black organizer working in Louisville, and Linda Davis shows up in your backyard and says, what are you doing here? I don't need you here. I can take care of myself. I don't need an Oberlin kid or a Harvard kid or a Wisconsin kid or a Swarthmore kid. You guys don't know, you guys are gonna get me killed. Right, so there was some tension. And there's still tension. What are your other questions? Don't be bashful. You got a historical figure in your front row today. Yes, ma'am.
How old are you from like when it started and you was involved to like, you know, like your age now?
How old was
You
I?
know you don't ask a woman's age.
No,
now.
that's okay. I was
No, we can
20.
ask her if she was back
I'm
in
fine,
64.
I'm not proud. I was 20 when I came down in 1964.
So she's a couple years older than you. And if you know math, you can figure it out from 64 to 24. What are your other questions?
I have one.
Jermaine, go ahead.
I have one. Did Mount Bayou offer any sort of safe haven to state workers?
Not while I was down here. I mean, there were folks who went to Mount Bayou, but not really. I mean, it was an all, as you probably know, an all black town, and I was not aware of a project that there was yeah. So.
Ethan, you got a question on BG? You got a hand up? BG, or go ahead.
What did your parents say when you lived? That's the real drama.
Okay. Well, my parents were liberal people. You know, they had good politics, at least in my mind. You know, today's mind. So they understood my interest, and they had to sign their permission. I had to get their permission. SNCC required that for if you were under 21, and I was. They had to give their permission for us to go, and also pledge about to make our bail if we were arrested. Okay, to get us out of jail, which is a good thing. And then, but it was during my training after the disappearance of Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman. My family urged me to reconsider my decision. And there was a family meeting, I'm told, back at my house. My sister may have been aware of that and maybe even.
This is Linda's sister, right back over there.
And a decision was made that my father should travel to Oxford, Ohio, where I was, and try to persuade me to change my mind. So he did that. He came, he spent, I guess, about a day there. He went with me to some of the program. But like I say, by that time I had met Mrs. Hamer. And there was no way I was changing my mind. And he did not fight with me. He did not say, well, you no longer have our permission. I don't know that it would have mattered at that point in it. I was going to get on the buses and come down. But anyway, he did not. And then I understand now that he was very emotionally wrought. Once he got back to my house, our house where we lived near Chicago, he just broke down and sobbed. So it was hard for them. It was hard for them. But once I made the decision, they were there 100%. My mother ended up coming down to Mississippi herself in a group called Wednesdays in Mississippi that was trying to bridge the humongous gap between white northern women and southern women. And she came up to Louisville to see me. My father became very involved in helping our community in Louisville purchase land to build a community center and wrote up the legal documents. So they really were wonderfully supportive. I mean, once it became clear to them, I was going to do it. Okay.
I have a question.
We'll go BJ and Sally, we'll do RJ. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so you just participated in the 60th anniversary of Freedom Summer, the event that was held this weekend. I was just wondering if you have any observations or reflections about similarities and differences in terms of challenges, opportunities, and strategies of the racial justice movement then versus now. I know that's a big complicated question, but I'm just wondering, any thoughts you have just from the perspective of someone who participated? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I thought it was very interesting. The meetings themselves were very much focused on young people and concerns about young people's involvement and what their interests were. I mean, I think that the NAACP is going to be working extremely hard in this presidential election, and you can imagine whom they're going to be supporting, and very concerned that youth look very carefully at the choices and just how very, very different the two candidates are. I mean, it reminded me kind of the situation in 1968 when it was Humphrey versus Nixon, and a lot of the left just felt at that point they could not go with Humphrey because of his supporting Johnson's policies in Vietnam. And I think that election, in my opinion, had a disastrous result with the election of Nixon, and I think that there's grave concern that that same kind of split within the liberal left wing of the Democratic group, folks you might expect to vote for a Democratic candidate, may lead to a similar result.
RJ.
Okay, my question is kind of long, so feel free to break it up. I can't sleep on this. But, so, you said you made it here the same night that the three activists, Goodman, Cheney, and Schwarner, went missing. Did you know them at all? And if so, okay, that's good too, because So, knowing that they went missing and the possibility of you being in danger, how did that make you feel when your mom decided, okay, I'm coming too, even though it wasn't in Freedom Summer, it was for her own group? And
your first question verbally. No, I did not know any of the three guys. I ultimately met Nikki Schwerner's college roommate, became a good friend of mine, and he loved Nikki Schwerner. Now I have one of my close friends knew the Goodman family, but I didn't know them. And then with respect to my mom, I really was happy to see her, you know. So that was good.
Yeah, me?
So how did this transformative experience during Freedom Summer impact your personal life, and also how you like navigating, just like how you navigate life and like your career?
Okay. While I was in Mississippi, I saw the first expression of the fight, of women's fight for equality, expressed by the women in Smith. And that impressed me. That really impressed me. I also witnessed the lawyering that was being done in this state by Arthur Kenoy Arthur Kenoy, my sister helped me out with the names.
Kunstler?
Bill, yeah, and Kunstler, who were coming down, and they actually ended up bringing a lawsuit against the Democratic Party in court and I couldn't tell you now because I wasn't studying the law then, the legal basis for it, but they sued the Democratic Party and made them, as a result of a lawsuit, you can bring people in and make them answer questions you have. Like, you know, how come the voting rolls are so skewed, and what are, and just challenge them. It was the first time they'd ever been put on the defensive, these people who were making the decision about whether folks could pass the Rhoda test or not. And that was very impressive to me, to see how law could be used as a sword. And I think, and then I also, had an older sister who is now deceased, but at the time she was a law student at Stanford. And she came down and worked on a project, a death penalty project in Alabama, the summer of 1965. She was trying to work, and she was one of the many students who helped form the statistical basis for the argument before the Supreme Court that there was racial bias in the way the death penalty was administered throughout the country, and especially in Mississippi. And it all mattered. It depended on, they were looking at rape cases and what were the sentences when it was, one racial setup, and then what were the sentences the other way around. And let's just say where white men fared significantly better, like probation or whatever, than black men. And so and she helped do that. So that, I thought, oh, okay. My sister, and she graduated law school, and I still was, I dropped out of school, I'll say that, for a while, because after Mississippi, I left at the end of August in 1965, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. But I ended up deciding that, yeah, I want an education. I want to get as much education as I can. So I went to the University of California at Berkeley and graduated from there. And of course, then all of the anti-Vietnam War issues were arising in the country. And so then I decided I really did want to go to law school. I wanted to have that to make change. And once I graduated law school, I worked as a public defender first, my first job out of law school, which I loved, and then I went to the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, and then eventually became a judge.
That's pretty cool. So a lot of kids who were down here during Freedom Summer, if you look at what they did in their careers, a lot of them became lawyers, and a lot of them became professors and teachers. So I think it's pretty safe to say, you tell me if I'm wrong, that this formative experience down here kind of showed you what was possible once you left the state.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, going back to the issue of women, I'm so delighted to see so many female faces in this room. The importance of that movement and of learning about what can be done for equity there is very important.
I got one more. So you came to Rubel, and I love that because, like I told you earlier, I'm from Rubel.
Yeah.
So looking at all of the work that you did, both in and around Rubel, what do you feel like your relationship is with Mississippi? Like, are you overjoyed with Mississippi and the work you've done? Do you feel like there's more you can do?
Look, there have been changes made in Mississippi. An important, voting is no longer the issue, or being able to vote. Voting may be the, yes, I mean, whom you're voting for could be still very much an issue, but being able to vote is no longer. And that took a lot of lives and a lot of treasure, but that was accomplished. That is no small thing. But look at Mississippi, how many registers of whatever, is it number 50 or number 49 or whatever? And, I still do follow Mississippi life. I get this online newspaper called Mississippi Today, and I read about the Goon Squad in Rankin County, the water crisis in Jackson. The failure to enact Medicare for, Medicaid for everyone. It's mind-boggling. It just, part of me just still is very sad.
Yeah, because we mention it to our kids sometimes how there has been a lot of change in Mississippi, and you've witnessed a lot of it, but we still point out the statistics, like we were saying, 50 in voting. I don't want to put too much, but third highest groceries in the nation, but we're one of the poorest nations, the worst streets, worst internet, infant mortality, child pregnancy. We have a lot of things that we need to work on, but we've come so far, so it's like, what is our next step? Can you kind of talk to that for us?
I think you've raised the issues, and I'll ask you, what's the next step? I think the next step I would suggest, respectfully, is to organize and get involved in your communities. Make demands. Make demands. That's what you've got to be willing to do. Find out what you care about and go after it. I would respectfully say.
And the genius of what they did, they organized. They organized. They went and before the cell phone existed, they went out and knocked on doors, put the coalition together, and then they made their ask, right? And we can organize a lot easier than they did. You guys had it hard.
It took a lot more legwork.
Literally.
Yeah, it certainly did.
Pablo, go ahead, Luke, yeah.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to tell you thank you from somebody from inner city, right, New York City, for everything you did and how we got to this point. and you answered the question that I had in my mind, like, you know, the courage you guys had as a group to do what you did. So like, what's next? I think you answered it. So I just wanted to tell you thank you, because I was gonna ask the same question. Like, what do we do as a whole? What do we do? You know, not for just people like me that want to come here and see how, you know, desperate of a situation it is. You know, how much more can we do? So I just wanted to tell you thank you from the bottom of my heart, and God bless you for everything you've done.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Jane, you got a question? Jane, you're on the edge of your seat here.
I was like, how did your relationship with your family change after you went to Mississippi?
It changed. It changed. I became an adult in their eyes. Yeah. And they didn't mess with me anymore. They didn't try to tell me what to do. They knew I just had to figure it out for myself. And they always were willing to support me. They were very emotionally supportive and I mean, financially supportive. I wouldn't want to tell you. My dad and mom bailed out, not just me, but so many other folks. I mean, that was wonderful. But they just, they were supportive. And I think they just knew that I was going to do ultimately what I thought I needed to do. When I decided, I think it broke my father's heart when I didn't return to college at the end of the summer, because he was the first person in his family to attend college. And so for me to say thanks but no thanks right now, at least, I'm sure, you know, it was not easy for him, but they continued to support me in every possible way.
So they were like the parents of Nick.
They were real good parents, yeah.
Other questions? Join me in thanking super intern. Do you know what to do?
Super intern. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful time. I bet you're having some fun too, even as you're learning all these great skills.